you totally can, but you have to be a little bit confident. It's startup, it's my startup, so it's our baby a little bit. And so I'm trying to get boots on the ground to start meeting people.
Just like that, we are back again with the Mind the Growth podcast. As always, I am Chris Kinghorn. Today we've got a special guest. We've got Devin Pincholini. Devin's been a good friend of mine for a while. Devin, thanks for coming on. We appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, happy to be here, guys. Excited to talk to you.
So yeah, I hope we could start off maybe with a brief history of your life. Maybe start with who you are, who your dad is, because I know some of our listeners will know him, and how you came to be where you are today. Give us a snapshot.
Oh yeah, happy to kick it off. So my name is Devin Pincholini. So I grew up in Chicago area, like southwest suburbs, specifically like around the Joliet area. Played soccer my entire life. Didn't really dive into like anything businessy in high school, to be honest. I met Chris in college. Probably working at Facebook was a little bit of maybe a dream. Not really sure at that time, but in college I kind of started creating products. And so Chris, maybe you remember the ASU list. Somehow that is still.
Yeah, let's share a little bit about the ASU list. I tried to log. I looked it up the other day, and I think it still had 20 some odd thousand followers. I want to say.
Yeah, so it is still alive and kicking. It was like my first launch into product development. And so when I was in my dorm room at ASU, my freshman year, we basically were trying to buy a bunch of furniture, right? And how it worked is we were having to get into all these sketchy conversations. I'm from Chicago. I had moved to Arizona. So I'm in a new city. And basically what we found was we kept having to have all these interactions with kind of non-ideal people around the Tempe area. And we didn't have a car. And so trying to track down somebody with a car was considerable. And so we found was okay, let's just launch this platform. And it was basically started as a Facebook group. It's called the ASU list. And it was a safer Craigslist for students only, kind of had this exclusive component to it. And it kind of blew up. And so while I was there, I think it blew up to 18,000 students. And since then, I think it's grown by probably another 10,000. But we launched a website in tandem alongside it. And so that even has, I think it accrues a few thousand posts a month still organically. I haven't touched the code on that in 5 years, but so that was kind of my first foray into product development. After that, I kind of knew I wanted to stay in building things. And so we launched a small moving company with some of my roommates at the time based on some of the demand in that group specifically, which was interesting. But it kind of kept me into this chain of creating products and, in that space. And so, I never really stopped, right? And so I eventually was kind of always doing little side projects, ended up getting really into the ASU list space and partnering with a marketing company at the time, and ended up leaving school. And so I left school to kind of focus on that for a little while and moved back to Chicago. And so in that time, I started working at Groupon. And so I was okay, while I love the technology side, I wasn't that strong of an engineer at the time, or, kind of had how I thought. And so I went into more of the business development consulting space, right? And so we're more working with companies and their marketing plans and C-level people kind of understanding where they were allocating money and, using yield management strategies to essentially get them more business. And so while I was there, quickly I identified some components of the role that I could automate, right? And so if I started dipping my toes more back into software engineering, and I started getting this whole sense of internal tooling, which is perhaps more effective than launching your own product in some cases. And so I leaned really hard into internal tooling at Groupon. That's where I did my first hackathon. And so I actually won a hackathon as a non-engineer at Groupon, which was the first time that had happened.
What were you guys hacking? What was the goal of the hack?
Yeah, so we're basically building a dashboard for buyers for Groupon goods. And it was basically just a productivity dashboard. It wasn't anything crazy, but it basically just brought in data from various sources. It was an internal tool. And so we were able to quantify how much impact we had with it in a pretty short amount of time. And so, I won a hackathon for that. And I was all right, I think I love doing this, right? And so kind of quit Groupon, moved to California cold turkey. I was all right, I'm going to try to get a job in the Bay. And it worked out. I moved to LA and did technical program management for a startup there called Pitos, which is doing pretty well. I was handed a bag of Pitos on an Alaska flight twice in the past 6 months. So I know that they're doing something right. But it was kind of a small group of people. It was like 10 of us. And, we got like our first cease and desist. One of my good friends there wrote a tagline, tigers live longer. Yeah, tigers live longer than cheetahs. And Frito-Lay was like not very happy. And they sent us a cease and desist. And they were like, here's like this Wikipedia article. They don't live longer. We're like, oh, that is hilarious. And so we framed it and like put it up in the office.
Chester the cheetah was very effective.
Right? It was like a series of articles about like certain species of tigers that don't live longer than cheetahs or something. We were like, okay, we don't care. This is so funny. But I spent about 10 months there before a Facebook recruiter reached out. And so I went up to the Bay and I was a software engineer there for about 3 years. And so mainly focusing on like Instagram creator profiles, did a ton of hackathons while I was there as well. And it's actually how I met my current partner. And so we kind of started in the same week. Did a hackathon together. So he's a former restaurateur in New York, owns like 7 restaurants around Manhattan and like NoHo area. And so we kind of kicked. He has not. He has since exited them. Yeah, he has since exited. But when I met him, he was still kind of balancing both, which is crazy. And so, that was very admirable. And so we kind of connected. And we're like, okay, let's try to build some teams to build these hackathons. And it went pretty well. We didn't win, but it was a really crazy experience into like building teams at big tech, and we kind of did it in our first month. And so he's been a great friend ever since. But yeah, it was about 3 years that I was an engineer there. And so mainly focusing on internal tooling. That's where I gravitate towards, like the business impact, but did a lot of work on creator profiles as well. And then since left in April to raise money for my own startup, which is Honeydew. And that is basically a banking app for creators. We're able to like facilitate payments between this like emerging new business segment pretty effectively. We did that by partnering with a bank. We're currently going through an existential awakening. We're trying to understand how we can explore like more Web3 and crypto space. And so we did like a pretty significant family and friends round. And right now we're still in the build phase. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I know you asked me about my dad, right? I think it helped me a little bit. And so basically, growing up in that environment, right? I was very young. So I can't say that I remember.
Give us the 30-second pitch. Who is your dad?
Yeah. Okay. I'll tell you who he is. So Christian Picciolini, you may have seen him on like speaking tours, CNN. Pretty much what he is an ex-gang leader. And so he had a lot of affiliation with like the white nationalist skinheads. And so what they did a lot. Google search will probably help you out there. But he was out of it by the time that I was, younger-ish. He was more in a band and kind of doing some touring things. And so he was a little bit out of it, but it definitely set a foundation. His redemption story is pretty grand. And so he was going through all of that while I was kind of a kid. And so I think it really set the foundation for just how to act. We didn't really have a lot of wiggle room when it came to, using phrases or anything like that some other kids might have had. And so I think it was all in all positive though.
So kind of shifting back to the new venture, because I do want to dive into this a little bit. But I feel like you did spend a good amount of time within big tech. So what do you think some of the biggest takeaways from your experience within big tech and those ecosystems were, and how did those set you up for success for what you're doing now?
Yeah. So what I'll say is it's definitely different depending on the big tech company you work for. And so I've worked at Groupon and I've worked at Facebook and Instagram, which is essentially the same thing. And so while they're definitely different experiences, there's some similarities. And so, working in Chicago is a lot different than working in San Francisco. And so, I only had experience to work in different companies in different cities. And so I won't speak like I worked in Chicago at Facebook, but what I will say is that there's this element of like curiosity that everybody has. And so it leads people to think really big, which is interesting. And so one of my first jobs out of college, I worked at a smaller tech company, not well known. And the difference between working there and working at Groupon and Facebook was like this autonomy you have as a new hire. There's almost like an emphasis put on like this lens that you come in with, right? And so on day one, you're able to actually give pretty unique feedback, and people will take that because you're a new employee. And so that was one of the biggest differences, I'd say, that working in like a smaller tech or a non-tech company. than a big tech company is like everyone is pretty curious. They're pretty open for your ideas. Like if you make it in, um, yeah, you have a lot of autonomy to like give people feedback. They're not always going to take it, that's for sure, but they'll listen to you, right? And they'll give you the opportunity to quantify that and do something about it and kind of set up a cohort to do that. And so the biggest things that I would say is like the autonomy to build like small cohorts, kind of like at school. And so like when I was in college, we were able to like we had these cohorts and you have like similar classes with them. It's kind of like that concept. And so yeah, it gives you a lot of autonomy to do side projects outside your role. That's what I like about
So
it.
a couple of follow-ons to that. You mentioned
Yeah.
earlier on that you were recruited to come to Facebook. So for those who aren't familiar with, let's say, big tech and recruiting and just those types of processes, explain how that worked and how did they find you? Why did they find you, etc.
Yeah. So not 100% sure why they found me. I'll tell you what they said. And so basically how it works is you try to like gather as many projects as you can, right? And so my resume was like this Frankenstein of like all these separate projects I was working on, from the ASU list to websites that I was building people, and I was still building my skill set at the time. And so a recruiter, I pieced that together and reached out over LinkedIn and just said, hey, it looks like you have an entrepreneurial spirit. We would love to bring you in. And when I first came in, actually came in as more of like a solutions engineer. And so we were
Gotcha.
working, it's like a hybrid product and engineering. And so we're still doing a significant amount of engineering, but we had like the autonomy to kind of build teams outside of that. And so in some projects, I was acting as a product manager, and in some I was working as a full-time software engineer. And so it's kind of different just based on what you're working on.
And so I have two true or false questions for you. First,
Yeah.
with big tech, I've heard from people that have, let's say, sold companies to Facebook or one of the big tech companies that there's a common practice that Facebook buys companies and people to basically put them in an office and have them do nothing to bring them out of the competitive pool. Did you witness this type of behavior, true or false?
I personally did not. False.
Because it sounds like your experience was much different, that it was more of
Yeah.
an open atmosphere that really promoted or emphasized autonomy and good work like that. So I was curious how that differed, or if you noticed any of that now that you're out.
Yeah.
It's more
So
so they put you on the roof or in the
Yeah.
closet, and they just say goodbye to you for 4 years. And once your NDA is out, then once you're fully vested, then you can leave.
I've heard those stories, and it might be that way for acquiring companies.
Yeah.
There's sometimes like a series of terms, but you work with some pretty crazy people when you work at Meta, right?
Yeah.
Facebook.
And we're gonna
As you'll
send
be
this.
working.
We're gonna send this to Facebook, and they're gonna send you a cease and desist for not calling it Meta. It's gonna be a whole thing, but
Oh,
it'll be okay.
But you come into contact with like some people with very impressive backgrounds. I'll just say that, you'll be in a room with somebody trying to figure out, how to make the scroll bar disappear, and you're sitting next to somebody who's like ex White House or, ex like senior at Google. And there's some times where you're like, is there too many brains in this room solving like this like animation issue? Like,
Yeah.
but there's like a level of imposter syndrome. And so it's like, you never really feel like you're one of those people. Right. And I think that's like kind of like a theme that goes around. And so
Sure.
they're pretty big on like battling mental health in that way. But yeah, I think at sometimes they're probably over resourced on certain projects.
Second true or false question: is Mark Zuckerberg a robot?
False. In lieu
So
of the cease and desist, that's probably
yeah.
going to
That's a great answer there.
I will elaborate on that one though. I've had a few, I went to many Q&As with him in a more intimate setting, and it definitely is a night and day difference from what we all see on TV. I think, if you throw me in front of Congress, I might be a little awkward too. Maybe not, I don't know, but maybe. But when we see him in Q&As, he's much more personable. I will say that. And so, maybe it's because you're surrounded by your peers and, the boss in the room. I don't know, but he's definitely more personable in intimate settings.
I mean, you
I
can't.
mean, Eric and I can't even we can't even land the intro on this, so I don't even know. I don't know how well we do in front of Congress. And that might be our opening clip right there. There's your first 10 seconds right there. You're welcome.
Love it.
I mean, he's clearly one of the best operators that's ever run a business. So I think he's doing something right. He gets a lot of flack, but he's pretty impressive for what he's built. So, Mark, don't come after us, please. Uh,
Devin, so I've got a
yeah, go
question
ahead.
about getting started on Honeydew. So
Yeah.
obviously at a larger shop, such as Meta, when and I think about conversations I've had with VCs in the past as well too, and something that hear consistently is your conviction level, and it has to be at a certain point. When did you know that you guys were ready to do what you're doing? When were you ready to take that step? What did that look like? And then ultimately, what was the motivation to do that, to build what you guys are building?
Yeah. So this is guys a great one. I think there's never like I've thought about this as something I literally have been thinking about probably since I left, right? And any amount of money you can raise is only like a some parts ego, some parts, you actually do need money to function and move forward. And so there's never like a perfect time. I would say that, leaving ASU to work on my own products and then jumping into Groupon and then jumping back to LA, it's been a series of taking off while you're putting the plane together, or kind of like jumping off the hill blindly and just hoping you'll figure out how to fly. And so, while Meta is like an impressive place to work and it's definitely cushy, some people use the term golden handcuffs. There's always opportunities to grow there, and so it's like do I continue growing for somebody else, or do I grow something that keeps me up at night? And so at that point, funding aside, you kind of have to make the leap. And we're allowed to moonlight projects, right? To a certain extent. I don't know if this one would have been approved necessarily, but in some cases, you're allowed to moonlight projects.
Right.
With that being said, funding becomes like very tough when it gets to that. And there's nothing that says, I'm committed to this. And I'm like kind of breaking those handcuffs off and just jumping off the mountain, right? And so once you're at that point, you have to leave. And so that's what we did. It's a crazy thing during like the first month after you leave, you're like, oh, is this the right move? But once you get going with conversations and investing and meeting people in the industry, it just makes sense.
So I know Google has a venture arm, and they
Hmm.
seem to be on the outside supportive of potentially some of their employees leaving and starting things and investing in them. Does Facebook have something similar? Do they have a venture arm? I'm not sure. I haven't heard of anything coming out of it if they do.
I haven't heard specifically. You know, Definitely people at Facebook act as LPs on
Yeah.
certain funds, but I wouldn't say that they're necessarily like affiliated with Facebook. Do they potentially do? I know that internally at Facebook, there's certain teams that act like startups for like kind of incubating new products. And so in that sense, I could see them like maybe acquiring somebody or funding somebody to bring them in. But I don't know if I had enough exposure there.
And with your fundraising now, there's a common discussion that goes around in, I guess, Silicon Valley and startups in the tech world that there's a fine balance between going after, let's say, a tier one VC firm to maybe have less stellar terms versus maybe a tier two and having better terms. How are you thinking about stuff like that now that you're fundraising, and what route are you taking?
Yeah, and so we definitely went friends and family at first, and we did that strategically.
Yeah.
We've opened up the door for some of those larger conversations, and we've definitely talked to some of the bigger guys.
Hmm.
What I'll say is everyone kind of comes into the meeting friendly, really, really friendly. If anything, some of the conversations I've had with some of the like bigger institutional venture capital firms, they come in almost nicer and more comfortable with you, and some of the smaller ones. Um, are more strict with like what they're expecting out of a conversation and maybe the framework for how you should propose that. And so we've been strategic from, who we've taken money from and kind of kept it in stealth mode to a certain extent. But in terms of like a strategy, we would like to work with an institution, but there's a lot more hand holding that comes on when you start working with somebody like SoftBank or Sequoia.
Yeah.
Um, and so you have to be ready for that, right? And while we're still in development phase, I think that those conversations could help, but it helps to have a partner. And so my partner is more of on the networking side and the business side. And so he's handling we're able to kind of double down and like handle like the tech and the networking like together, but also separately. And so it helps with fundraising a little bit, and like gives us a little bit more time. Yeah, I'd say it's a critical part.
Yeah, being a single founder is difficult. Trust me, it's a lot of late nights and a lot of trying to figure out if you're doing the right thing, just questioning yourself. But no, absolutely, partners are amazing.
And having not gone through it myself, I've always had the curiosity of if I were to start a startup of whatever it may be, I wouldn't know where to go in terms of hiring engineers or corporate structure eventually after maybe a Series A. And I know that's something that VC firms offer guidance on.
Mhm.
So are those conversations that you're having right now with your co-founder? Where are you acquiring talent? Is it just through your network and friends that are coming on board? And it may be too early for this question, but help educate me on that because I don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah. So yeah, no, I love it. So the VC, the venture, investors, right? And not all of them are VCs, but venture investors, like they kind of come at you with different approaches. So some will be like, hey, we can help you with resourcing and headcount and hiring. Others, are kind of like, hey, I'm hands off, and you can ask me questions if you want. Some are on like the distribution side, which is actually pretty great. Like how we actually get your first users, 100,000, things like that.
Hmm.
Um, in terms of acquiring headcount, I ran a digital agency prior to this, and so that helped. I had definitely some previous relationships that I brought into our startup to kind of energize it and make it a little bit more powerful. But I wouldn't shy away from some of like the more in-your-face resources like Upwork, if you're able to interview for those roles. When I was at Meta, I went through like pretty extensive interview training. I think I did probably over 100, maybe 50 to 100 interviews while I was there. And so through that, you kind of identify what to look for. And so some positions I'll look on Upwork, but I don't shy away from straight up reaching out to somebody on LinkedIn. Kind of going through referrals and, reviews that people write and, keywords. I was never a recruiter, so I probably can't use LinkedIn at its full power. But I definitely don't shy away from reaching out and talking to people about the opportunity and just trying to, see if they're interested like that.
And with Honeydew as a company, how would you say it's either similar and a direct competitor or different than something like Mercury Bank? Because it sounds like
Mhm.
you're targeting a similar audience.
Totally. Yeah. And so Mercury was actually one of the payment rails we were in the early days looking at using. And so Mercury, they're great. Actually, they have like an entire fund where they fund companies that use their payment rails, and it's a pretty
Yeah.
fantastic. It's a like circular program, and so we were definitely interested in using them. Their rates were a little bit higher than we were looking for, and so we're looking for more of like to act as a money transmitter, and so we went straight for the bank partnership. And so through the bank partnership, you're able to bypass years of like licensing, and you're able to be you actually get made a program manager of the bank. And so we went that route, and
Is that still
strictly
considered
fiscally.
like a neobank is a common term I hear?
Yeah, neobank, yeah. And so basically you're able to like wrap somebody else's payment rails and licensing up and, not call it your own. You have to do a significant amount of the engineering more than if you were using, say, Stripe or
Hmm.
Square, right? But they make it significantly easier. Yeah, and the companies coming out today are pretty fantastic. And what we're looking for is something on the crypto or Web3 side. We've recently seen like I think everybody's probably seen it. This huge surge of like Web3 and crypto requests, and there's a lot of things going on with like inflation. I think people are scared, and so we've personally gotten a lot of requests like, "Hey, are you guys thinking about crypto as your entry point?" We're like, "Well, we weren't. We were like, okay, we want to be the first player in the market, but." We weren't really thinking about it as our go-to, and that's quite changed in the past few months. We're really gonna nosedive into it, and so while Mercury would work, they don't really they're not as ubiquitous as the solutions we're going for.
How would that work in practice to integrate blockchain or Web3 protocols?
Mhm. Yeah, so two ways. And so there's one that we're thinking of, which is actually around like the invoicing itself. And so what we've found is that people want to get paid. So they want a brand. So in our use case, a lot of brands like Adidas or Nike pay influencers to do social media marketing, right? And so in that exchange, you have brand to creator or W-9 employee. And so in that exchange, what we want to do is say, hey, we want to allow the brand to pay in fiat. We want the brand can pay in USD and they can swipe their business card, and it's good. But the actual creator would like to get paid in, say, Bitcoin or Ethereum. And so the best way we've identified to do that is to actually peg it to a stable coin like USDC. It's fluctuating pretty crazy right now, but usually I would say it's a stable coin to peg your product to. And so that's kind of how we're thinking about it. So we'll likely enter with the creator getting paid in USDC and then them having the opportunity to change it to Ethereum or Bitcoin, for example. But it's too volatile to just exchange it for you right away.
No, you're good. I was going to highlight that. Eric and I are big fans of crypto. Do you have a preferred blockchain at this point for either development or just a personal favorite? Because I know obviously there's a variety of different factors when you're looking at building different products within different ecosystems. So what does that look like for you guys? Is it more so what type of talent that you can go after, or is it less of a worry of what the chain is more so what you're going to actually be exchanging into? What does that picture look like?
So right now, we're thinking about using Polygon, which is like an Ethereum. It's like a roll up to Ethereum. It basically like bundles gas prices. And so fiscally, that one makes the most sense for us in terms of like batching, and how many fees we're going to have to pay. And so we're leaning towards that. But we're still in the discovery phase. And so we're really trying to figure out who's going to be around for us to build our payment rails around, because the market's kind of going up and down. Polygon seems to be the most obvious choice, though.
How about Cardano for all the ADA gang out there?
Yeah. Solana too.
Yeah.
We're kind of researching right now. We're doing a lot of talks. And so I know last week, when we had to push this, I was actually going to Denver for an Ethereum conference. I got sick, and so I literally flew there, couldn't go. My partner went. And he was able to, we flew in together. And so he was able to kind of go in there and meet people and get a better idea. And so we're still crafting the approach a little bit, but we're fully finished.
Did he see Vitalik in his bear suit?
He was actually with Vitalik for a little bit. Yeah. And so they sent me like a selfie. I was like, this is crazy.
Yeah.
I hated to be sick.
I'm sure.
It's cool though. Yeah. And we have a smaller project in this space. We're actually launching in about a week, which is like a DAO. And so it kind of ties back into, empowering communities and, anti-extremism and just kind of giving people a voice. Should be pretty interesting. But yeah, that was why we went there, to kind of network for that opportunity and build it out a little bit alongside Honeydew. And we're trying to meet some engineers in the space too, because to be honest, like engineers that are really, have a high acumen in this space, they're hard to come by, and they're almost all like 19 years old. And so like they're like, young guys that are just getting out of like high school or still in college, and they went deep into Web3. And so it's kind of like a battleground for onboarding these engineers. Like, to be honest, you can't really just bring on anyone. You can't just outsource the role. You totally can, but you have to be a little bit confident. It's startup. It's my startup. It's our baby a little bit. And so I'm trying to get boots on the ground to start meeting people.
Well, then coming from the engineering background that you do, how was this shift for you, just seeing the engineering focus on different blockchains, versus something a little bit more traditional in the past? How has that been?
It's exciting. I feel like every year there's like a new JavaScript framework or something that comes out. And so I'm primarily on the front end. And so when I was doing engineering, I was primarily working in like React, which is like a meta-based JavaScript framework. And so it hasn't changed too much for me. Yeah, it hasn't changed too much for me specifically, but the backend engineers, it definitely has. And so they're working with completely different frameworks and tools and languages. And so it definitely is better for us to bring on somebody who's like who is very familiar with the space. And we also want to work with people who are up to date, right? And so not everybody's as curious as we are, and we can't be in all facets. And so we'd like to bring people on that have that level of curiosity as well.
Are you seeing Solidity being the top programming language in the crypto space?
So far, so far. And so the project that we're launching, or I know we're doing an announcement this week for it. That is basic. Yeah, we're using that as the back end. And so it hasn't been too bad right now. Like there's a lot of, I think this space is really good about documenting the work and putting it out there for others to use. And so, I've never seen better YouTube tutorials in my entire life than what these engineers are putting out. And so while they're complex, I think they're doing a good job of making sure that everybody can get involved.
So you're welcome to announce it here, since this won't be coming out until after the official announcement. But up to you. I am curious about the DAO, though. If you can tell us more about that.
Cool, I can. So yeah, as long as this doesn't launch within the next 5 days, we should be good. It's called Golden DAO.
Okay.
And so we've actually partnered directly with Andrew Yang. Are you guys familiar with him?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we partnered directly with him. And so we were flying, I was going to Denver last week to meet up with him, and it ended up running into like Vitalik. And so I couldn't go, but my partner was able to go. And so we're working with some pretty exceptional engineers in the back end there, but it's called Golden DAO. And it's basically like a community to support like Asian Americans, and basically just give everyone a voice who feels like they're maybe ostracized or being affected by like any of this crazy extremism. I mean, in 2021, it just like skyrocketed. Like, maybe it was just the documentation, but basically like extremist events skyrocketed in 2021. And so this is going to be a space where people can get together and help each other out. Sometimes the justice system isn't picking these up, and people want to help each other. And so it's less of like a frontier justice. It's not like that. I don't want it to come off like that, but it's more of like empowering people to feel the best they can.
So much to dive into with that. So, is this at all related to his forward party, or is it at all political, or is it more just a almost like a nonprofit support system for Asian Americans or whoever else?
Yeah, so it is not political. I know that he just launched another project. I think it's called Lobby 3, which is more about giving people voices in a political sense. But I would say this isn't related to that. And so, yeah.
Is it related to your other company, Honeydew, or is it just totally separate?
Totally separate. So it's like a totally separate project in the space. And so what it is, it's basically like a membership NFT. And so what it does is you're able to access a lot of like IRL, right, events, like whether it's like speaking events or networking conventions. There's going to be a series of those. And so it'll be a lot of that. It'll be a lot of virtual community, a pretty big Discord community. But that's really it on the docket right now. We're likely launch multiple levels. But right now we're just focused on getting the initial pre-sale and mint out there.
So Chris and I will definitely want some access to that pre-sale if we can beg for it, because I think that would be awesome. But
yeah, shoot me over your wallet addresses. We'll make it happen.
Yeah,
perfect.
That's a risky proposition, but for you, anything. So how did you get connected with Andrew Yang?
Yeah. So it's kind of like a series of connections. And so my partner, he's a pretty big voice in the Asian community. And so he's the kind of the head guy behind Stop Asian Hate. And so there's a lot of movements in New York that went down. I know Andrew Yang spoke there. I think Rihanna was even there. And so he was like the main kind of organizer behind those, and he was doing a lot of speaking at those events. And
Gotcha.
I think from that, he started working with Andrew Yang, and Andrew Yang, yep, exactly. Both kind of from New York, guys from New York, kind of on the ground. And so, yeah, it just kind of worked out. And so that was, mostly last summer. And so since then, he's expressed interest in kind of helping out the community, and with, extremist events kind of skyrocketing last year, it kind of made sense.
And this is the partner who had restaurants in New York, correct?
That's correct, yeah.
So would there be any restaurants that I would be familiar with that he ran or owned?
Maybe, yeah. So I know there's one pretty big one called the Pokey Spot. It was like one of the first poke restaurants in New York.
Yeah.
And I know he had a few restaurants around NYU. I think one was called the Cozy Spot. trying to think. Those are the only ones that I know. I know he had multiple locations in
Yeah,
each of those.
lots of spots.
Yeah, right.
Common theme. Devin, so kind of sticking on the food questions then,
Yeah.
what style of pizza is better, Chicago or New York? Being that you've spent time in
Ooh,
both.
Bonus,
I like.
New Haven, if if that's an option.
I have to go with Chicago. I prefer the Chicago pizza, but I will say I don't prefer. There are two types of pizza in Chicago, and not everybody knows that. And there's the show winner, which is like the big pie, which is like the Chicago style pizza. We also have another low key pizza style, which is like this pan pizza, and it's more like I'll say beggar's pizza for the Chicago people that listen to this, but it's more like
Kind of like a deep dish almost, or
it's
Or
like
like a
half deep
Detroit style.
dish. Yeah, no, it's Detroit style is good too, though. I will say we didn't throw that in the ring. I like that probably second best, but it's like this hybrid between. It's a really deep pizza, but it's not deep dish, and so that's kind of my favorite. Um, yeah, but New York's good too. I fold my pizza, so I guess I'm just like half in both.
Top three food cities, go.
Top three foods: sushi,
Foods.
tacos.
Okay, that works. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, okay,
Sushi, tacos.
tacos. Yeah, and Italian food, and that's gonna be a broad one.
And top three food cities
Ooh.
in the world. I don't know.
In the world. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll say Florence, Italy, number one for sure. That was like an unreal experience. And then I have to say probably Los Angeles and then Chicago. Chicago's more
Wow.
like on the comfort food side. I love Chicago food. And it kind of has like an array of like Italian, Japanese, but I also LA. Yeah, I love food in LA.
Do you
Los
have
Angeles? Okay.
a go-to spot in LA that you really enjoy?
I do. So it depends. If I'm bringing friends in town, Matsuhisha, which is like it's a Japanese restaurant. It's a Nobu restaurant. And then it's like more of like gastronomy. And then Chicago, yeah, definitely Chicago. There's like a restaurant in Chicago called the Linea, which is just like off the
Of
charts.
course.
Grand Aske's like,
Yeah.
yeah, insane. And so both of those two are like my gastronomy. Uh, yeah, that's where I gravitate towards.
Devin, have you been to Cafe Monarch in Scottsdale?
I have not been yet.
Okay, you'll have to go at some point. We actually, coming soon to you, Mind the Growth podcast, Chef Ben Wald. We did a podcast with Chef Ben there. They've got a
Nice.
spinoff called Reserve as well too. And it's Eric. What do you think? Probably one of the top in the state,
Yeah,
if not
I
the.
fun fact, I was there last night, so it is good. Yeah, there. I would say most people would agree that it's one of the top restaurants in Arizona for sure.
Arizona has fantastic food. I will say Arizona has food from every state. Like
Underrated.
it's unreal. Yeah, it's one of the only spots in the country where it's like a union of like all the restaurants that are only in that state. It's
Totally.
pretty crazy.
Yeah, yeah. What I was surprised by, because I've only been to Chicago once, and my younger brother, who you know, he had actually told me that you were a foodie because he got your recommendations when he was in Chicago. So
Yep.
that's what brought this topic up to begin with. But I was surprised by the Mexican food scene there, which is like incredible.
Right?
I mean, starting with, I guess Frontera was one of the OGs in Chicago, but they have a lot of good spots there. I did not expect that.
Oh, definitely. And when I went to Arizona, I was like, all right, I'm sure that the Mexican food where I'm from isn't that good because I hadn't been anywhere else really, right? And I get to Arizona, I'm like, all right, well, the Mexican food in Chicago is like just as good as this.
Oh I will say maybe even better. I mean, shout out to Rick Bayless. He knows what he's doing with that Mexican food. Um, I was pleasantly surprised. But there's been a few up and coming spots in Arizona that maybe since you've been here, next time you're back, we'll have to take you to. Shout out to
I
Vicina.
did. I
Yeah,
went. So I
Vicina's
went.
great.
I was in Arizona for Barrett Jackson
Okay, so
a few weeks ago.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and we went to Mexican restaurants in Scottsdale, like North Scottsdale. So there's the Mission. Does
yeah,
that ring
yeah,
any
Yeah,
bells?
Mission Hill.
It was pretty good.
yeah. That's a good spot. I would say maybe 5 years ago was its peak, and it was fantastic, and it was probably the best Mexican restaurant in the city at the time. But it's lost some luster, unfortunately. But I'm sure it's still decent. I haven't been
It
in
was
a
a
while.
family affair. It
Yeah,
worked.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Nice.
Devin, so one question we like to ask everybody is obviously the name of the podcast is Mind the Growth. And when you hear the word growth, what does that mean to you?
Yeah. What does it mean? Well, initially, I think of curiosity, which is, I think, the biggest component of growth that you could have. Continuing to stay curious, and that like provides you the ability to manufacture excitement about what you're doing. If you don't have it naturally, you're able to like kind of manufacture this excitement through learning. And so whether you like your job or whether you don't like your job, everybody likes small wins and like learning things and feeling smart. And so, like I said, whether you do or you not like your job, that's kind of neither here nor there. It's about finding something on your path that you can grow in day by day. And so there's like this Japanese saying called Kaizen, which one of my former managers talked to me about. It's kind of stayed with me probably for the last 10 years. Not 10, I would say maybe 8 years. And so it's about continual growth every single day, whether that's like 1%, you're 0.1%, it doesn't really matter as long as you're getting better in some area. And so, yeah, get addicted to learning and small wins. And yeah, when you say growth, all of that kind of comes to mind for me.
Oh, well, that's a great answer.
The Japanese know what they're doing. That's my top food city. Just as an FYI,
Is it?
Tokyo.
I have
for
not
sure.
been.
Oh my
Oh,
god.
I've
need to
heard
go.
that. Oh yeah, no, yeah.
Yeah.
One of my good friends went. He did like a video game kind of tour and a food
Yeah.
tour while he was there, and it looked like the best vacation ever.
It's incredible. My wife and I went a couple of years ago, right before the pandemic, in fact, and we spent a week and a half in Tokyo, Osaka, Kyoto. Oh my God, I'd probably live there if it wasn't so far away and if I knew the language. Everything just makes perfect sense. They figured it out. So
Perfect.
I think that'll do it. I appreciate you coming on, Devin. And in let's say 3 to 5 years, where are we going to see you? What's Honeydew going to be doing? What's it going to be worth? What are you going to be doing?
I don't want to jinx us, but if I'm still in the space, that means I'm doing something right. And so, the idea is to democratize banking so that people don't feel ostracized by having to get bank loans for their new LLC or something like that. We want to make getting starting a business as easy as starting a Venmo account. So that's hopefully what we'll be really proud of in about 5 years.
We'll have to check in the next 6 months to a year and a half and see how everything's going.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Cool.
Perfect.
Congrats on the new startup. We're excited to see, and we're definitely going to send you our wallets for the minting of Golden Dow.
Yeah. We'll work you guys in getting them into the pre-sale, and so I'll send you guys some more information too as we're getting more near the launch date for that. But yeah, it was a pleasure speaking with Eric, Chris.
Thanks, man.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming on, Devin. Appreciate it, man.
Yeah, thanks
Catch
guys.
you later.